What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave in a bit of a different setting, but my voice is getting kind of scratchy. It was harder to project, so a bit easier in this setting with the microphone right next to me. This will probably be for like a day or two as my voice comes back, and we'll be back to normal probably before the end of this week. But for now, I'll have Evan just throw up a card here, and we'll kind of go that route with some temporary graphics until that point, because there's actually a lot of stuff happening, especially with Sony setting up for what seems to be a major move, as it leaked out a bit early through a recent publication showing what I think is a pretty serious acquisition if it shapes up here for the industry. We also have what looks to be a disastrous day one launch for Microsoft, which once again plays into that idea of an all-digital future and if we're truly ready for it. And Dragon Quest III HD 2D has been an awesome release with that HD 2D art style, and now it looks like Square Enix could be looking towards another classic to put into that art style that I think many fans are going to be calling for. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with Xbox Game Pass games going in for the second half of November. This is Wave 2 over on their Xbox site, which we can see. This is over on news.xbox.com. Starting at the top, we do have Flight Simulator 2024. That is available now. More on that actually later on in the show. Day one release. Another day one release is out today, November 20th. That's Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl. That's cloud, PC, and Xbox Series X and S. We also have Little Kitty Big City on console, Plate Up console, Nine Souls cloud, PC, and Xbox Series X and S, that being November 26th. On November 27th, we have Aliens Dark Descent, cloud, console, and PC. So overall, I would say pretty good entries here, especially with those two big day one releases, Flight Simulator and Stalker 2, which I preloaded Stalker 2, and it was almost 150 gigabytes. So not a small game by any measure, but technically Flight Simulator was like 12 gigabytes. So kind of balanced out, I guess, a bit there. Not bad, though, for Game Pass. Definitely check out at least those two day one releases as they're available this week. Also, we had some news come out of Remedy. This, though, having to do with Control 2, which we can see this over on their official account. They do mention Alan Wake 2 has sold over 1.8 million units, which that one seems to be lagging behind a bit. They're mentioning it's just now starting to break even, which is just incredible to me that it's taken this long for it to happen. Control Ultimate Edition will release on Mac February 12th. Interesting to see how that one runs, say, on the M chipsets, especially the M4. Control 2 will be an action RPG. And this one seemed to cause a lot of conversation because Control 1 is like an action adventure game with some minor, very minor RPG elements. This seems to be them completely leaning into it, which makes me immediately think of like leveling up and maybe attribute points dedicated to weapons or armor or just more of a built out sort of skill tree. It's hard to say how deep they're going to go here with Control 2, but clearly they want to somewhat separate it from Control 1, so something to definitely keep an eye on there with what their strategy is going to be here going forward with the sequel. Oh, and we just had that story for the PlayStation 5 Pro and Silent Hill 2 and a few other games that actually were having issues on the stronger hardware. It appears some of those companies have taken notice and are trying to figure it out. This, for example, was posted by Bloober Team in response to Silent Hill 2 and some of the struggles it's had, which is just, we're working on it. And then EA also posted over on the Star Wars account, we're aware of the issues with Star Wars Jedi Survivor on PlayStation 5 Pro and are actively investigating. So we'll see how this goes in the future, because I assume these patches will, I don't want to say be rushed to market, but get out there a bit quicker, considering the PS5 Pro, if you get a patch going, seems to be drawing a lot of interest for older titles. And while Silent Hill 2 is a newer one, Jedi Survivor is a bit older, and I mean, relatively speaking, like a year or so old, right? So in this case, EA would say, hey, if we have a good patch going forward, it might draw more interest and just more sales, which we'll have to talk about that with another older title here later in the show. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a new report that's actually pointing towards Sony making a major acquisition. And this broke pretty much overnight and had the internet buzzing the next morning. And we can see this is posted up. This is by Reuters, who says Sony is in talks to acquire Kadakowa, the Japanese media powerhouse behind the Elden Ring game. Two sources familiar with the matter said, as the technology giant looks to add to its entertainment portfolio. The talks between the two sides are ongoing, and if successful, a deal could be signed in the coming weeks, the sources said. Sony currently has 14% stake in FromSoft and a 2% stake in Kadakowa. Now, if you look at the gaming studios underneath Kadakowa at this time, of course, many people are going to say From Software immediately, but there's also Acquire, Gotcha Games, and Spike Chunsoft. And yes, I've been corrected about this before where I said Spike Chunsoft. Apparently it is Spike Chunsoft, but while obviously people think of FromSoft and what they did with Elden Ring and what they've done with like Dark Souls and Demon Souls and all these other titles, the interesting thing about Spike Chunsoft is they just released, alongside of Bandai Namco, of course, publishing, they just released and developed Sparking Zero, Dragon Ball Z, which is a very, very successful so far arena-style fighter that fans are getting a kick out of. So, FromSoft, Spike Chunsoft, Acquire, who has a deep history. I mean, there's a lot of development presence here for Sony to acquire and bring in-house, or even if they just kind of keep them separate to themselves. I mean, there's a lot of potential there for Sony working alongside of FromSoft, Spike Chunsoft, and Acquire. However, while I look at this as more of a gaming thing, it's hard not to notice that this would continue Sony's path right now into anime and manga, where they have been making some serious moves in that sector to start to lean into the idea of like a monopoly. And that's the thing that people are the most concerned about here with this acquisition. Not necessarily FromSoft, but the fact that Kadakowa actually has a pretty sizable presence when it comes to anime and manga distribution. See, because alongside of all of the anime and manga visual novel stuff that Kadakowa's done, Sony currently has Crunchyroll, Funimation, Aniplex, and more, and you put all of that together under one umbrella. If Sony did purchase Kadakowa, you would have a massive, massive entity in anime and manga, and you would say even just kind of controlling the market in some respects. So that seems to be a pretty serious concern when this acquisition has come up recently with Reuters. Now, it is interesting because we hear about an acquisition like this through a report and a leak, and usually that happens when we're like right up against it actually getting done. I mean, like that same day, hours where they're like, hey, get ready guys, news about the drop, because the press release is already going around behind the scenes. Apparently, this deal is weeks away from being signed, so there's no guarantee that it's actually happening. But this is Reuters. They have multiple sources that are pretty confident on it. At least it seems that talks have been ongoing for a while now. And the running idea is that Kadakowa would be looking to sell because a lot of the founding family isn't necessarily involved anymore. And let's face it, they're kind of at an all-time high with FromSoft. Like the value that FromSoft has created over the past several years, I mean, it's incredible, incredible stuff. So yeah, when you get to an all-time high and maybe you're not as interested because the founding family isn't as involved, yeah, maybe you look to sell. And well, Sony has a 14% stake in FromSoft. Guess who else has a sizable stake in FromSoft? That's Tencent. So if they're shopping it around, would you rather have Sony buy it or rather have Tencent? That's kind of what we're down to at this point, if indeed this becomes a reality here in a few weeks. But still, we have seen some unfortunate results of acquisitions with layoffs sweeping across the industry right now, and at times the direct result of an acquisition like we see with Activision Blizzard. So I think this would be in terms of Sony's strategy, a better idea than what they did with Bungie, where they jumped in headfirst to like what they hoped to be a turnkey live service company, and that hasn't worked out really how they were envisioning, whereas this would be more or less geared towards the multimedia side as opposed to just being all gaming. So it's something to monitor here. We'll see if that does indeed come through here in the next few weeks before the end of the year, and I'll be curious to see how much that acquisition would cost Sony, because market capitalization is one thing, but if there is a bidding war behind the scenes, it can certainly go above the roughly $3 billion market capitalization that we see right now with Kadakowa. So something to keep an eye on. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, which did release yesterday, as we mentioned, with Game Pass. So technically you can download it now. and hopefully play it, which if you look over on Steam right now, you can see the reviews coming in at overwhelmingly negative. That's over 2,000 of them at the time of this recording. And people online were asking, okay, what's going on? Why is it overwhelmingly negative? Because Microsoft Flight Simulator is generally a celebrated franchise every time there's a new entry, which is usually like, what, every 3 or 4 years or so. And this goes back decades at this point. Again, it's a storied franchise for Microsoft. Well, they made a bit of a change for 2024. That being they're relying more so on the cloud than ever before. See, in previous entries, even as recent as, what was that, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, you could download large chunks of the game, like 150 gigabytes or something, and still play it offline with lower quality like photogrammetry and imagery and textures and stuff for the ground level, but you could still play it. However, if you did stream from the cloud, you would get up-to-date real-time effects or weather. Say if there was indeed a hurricane out in the ocean, you could actually fly to it and check it out in Flight Simulator. It was like next level stuff, and it's really, really cool, but the game didn't have to rely on the cloud to function. Not the case this year, however. In fact, if you look over on the Flight Simulator forums now, I mean, it's covered in threads that are just talking about being stuck in a queue. So I went ahead and downloaded the game on the Xbox, came out to just over 11 gigabytes, which I will say that is a serious benefit here when it comes to cloud computing like this. You're not downloading 150 to 200 gigabytes worth of a game. You're downloading 11 to apparently 30 gigabytes is the most right now, say on PC. And then everything is kind of streamed in as you're playing the game. And when it works, as people are sharing online when they got past the queue, it worked really well and it looked awesome. However, the big caveat there is if it works, because it seems like the overwhelming majority of people, it didn't work. So if you were someone who just bought the game outright, which there was an Aviator edition of the game that was like $200, you're going to feel burned on release day and, I don't know, maybe return it or just not tune back in for a while, hoping they eventually fix it. It's just that first impression that you never get back ever again. And it's always strange to me to hear about cloud issues with Microsoft when like the core of their business is cloud. So it's always weird to me when their cloud streaming isn't as good as the competitors, or you launch something like this that's reliant on the cloud and it's not functioning properly day one, which I understand launches aren't always the smoothest with something like, think of like an MMO. Where everyone does have to sign into a server and like, okay, server overload. This is a game that is something you should just be able to play by yourself offline. However, because the amount of data that gets streamed in is, I'm not even kidding, like petabytes of data, it's not feasible to have you download the whole thing. So it's this weird crossroads where you're just sort of stuck in a stalemate of here's hoping this queue and this load screen eventually goes to 100% so I can play the game that I paid for on launch day. But that's that all digital future for you that we apparently are on a crash course for if you take publishers' words for it at this time. And basically it's the point where you cross your fingers and just hope that it works on launch day. It's pretty far removed from buying a game at the store, taking it home, popping the disc in, sitting back and letting it load from there. You got a lot of reliance right now on data centers hundreds of miles away, so here's hoping they work on release. Next up, let's talk about a PlayStation 5 Pro patch that's now been announced, which I have noticed these announcements. These developers are making a big deal out of it, which is a smart strategy because if you hear that there's a new 8K title for the PS5 Pro or a new 4K 60 FPS with ray tracing, all the bells and whistles you were promised when you bought the PS5 Pro, there's a good chance you're going to go check that game out again, or maybe for the first time. So for example, in this case, we can see, this is over on their official account, Callisto Protocol, experienced like never before with the power of PlayStation 5 Pro. Fight out of Black Iron Prison in breathtaking 8K at 30 FPS or 4K at 60 FPS, both with full ray tracing. It's now available. So you can just download this patch on your PS5 Pro and play a game that I think looked good on the PS5. However, when you went down to performance mode, it certainly got a bit more blurry, and it like the film grain really did a lot of the heavy lifting to try to reach that like 60 FPS mark. When it was in quality mode, yes, it looked great. It looked incredible, especially like still shots and stuff, but you really notice it, especially when you're trying to dodge or time things. It's almost like you're underwater with that lower frame rate. And I did download Callisto Protocol again, which I played all the way through it, but I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go check it out here on the PS5 Pro. And you know what? Right now, if I'm a studio and I'm just looking at my back catalog, I'm going to start firing off all kinds of PS5 Pro patches if I am able to go back and do that, because it seems like people just see this like a pro patch and they're like, oh, maybe I'm going to go buy the game for the first time. Think about it. If the person spent $700, maybe almost $800 with the disc drive for a system, and if the game's like $20 on sale, whatever, I'll pick that up just so I can see the full effects of this system. They are catering to an enthusiast market, which, yeah, there's probably a bunch of extra sales there that you weren't able to get before just because of this patch. And especially, I think, if you could just tout 8K, most people don't have the TV for it, but still, it's like, oh, it's an 8K game. Maybe I'll get it just in case. Maybe I will look into an 8K TV at some point. It'll be nice to have this title. Also, though, 4K 60 with ray tracing. I mean, even I downloaded it again just to see what it looks like here with Callisto Protocol. But if you have it and you have a PS5 Pro, yeah, give it a download and take a look, see what you think. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Square Enix, Dragon Quest III HD 2D, and maybe their aspirations to move a classic Final Fantasy game into this style. Now, this was done in an interview with Inverse, which we can see posted up over on their website. This was from the Dragon Quest III HD 2D producer, Masaki Hayasaka, and when asked with Live Alive and now Dragon Quest III, are there any other classic Square RPGs that you'd like to see get similarly remade? Why do you think the HD 2D style works so well for remakes? Responds, it's not that we have concrete plans for this, but personally, I would have to say Final Fantasy VI. Octopath Traveler, the first HD 2D title, was developed while referencing Final Fantasy VI as it had the highest quality pixel art. I would love to see how the game we reference would look with the HD 2D art style. Because this art style itself was created with referencing such titles, it's highly compatible with games originally made using pixel art. This compatibility is probably why people feel this style is a match made in heaven with these types of remakes. So I think this is a fascinating little bit of information here that was thrown out during this interview, with Final Fantasy VI actually being the reference for the original HD 2D title Octopath Traveler. Again, mentioning the high quality pixel art. Yes, when I look at some of these older Super Nintendo or Super Famicom games, and I go, how would I prefer them to remake it? Bring it up and make a Final Fantasy VII remake situation where it splits into multiple titles? Do I want them to actually make it like this 3D style game like we had with Trials of Mana? Or do I like the idea of HD 2D? Well, honestly, I'm playing through Dragon Quest III HD 2D right now, and I think the game looks awesome. And because it's sort of in this style, to me, I think they're able to keep it closer to that more traditional style than any other way. So if they went to full 3D, they might have some pressure to do a little bit more maybe, and maybe make it more action-based to fit into a certain category with a newer generation. Whereas when you see Dragon Quest III right now, you go, okay, yeah, clearly that's based on a very traditional style of RPG from the 90s and even the 80s or what have you there with the original Nintendo and Famicom. But it's based on an older style. So you know what you're kind of getting going into it. And that's one of the things I really like about HD 2D is it kind of mashes the old with the new and just brings it together in this awesome looking style. So yeah, if they're going to do Final Fantasy VI, I'd much prefer them to have an HD 2D version of it, a remake, especially because it was the original inspiration, or at least the model for this HD 2D style. I mean, come on. You've got to make that happen now that you put that out there in the world. It all makes sense. Go back to the beginning, and I think put your best effort behind it and remake Final Fantasy VI. I think the Final Fantasy crowd would absolutely get behind it, and I would love to see it actually happen. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, are you going out and shopping in stores during Black Friday this year? Okay, 85% just say no, 15% say yes. I feel like if I ran this poll back in 2010, 2011, like that late 360, late PS3, even Wii time, this would have been flipped. 85% yes, 15% say no. And it's just, we're so online now with our shopping. I think most people would rather just wait for either Cyber Monday, or they've been taking advantage of Black Friday deals this whole time, because at this point it's extended all the way to the beginning of November. Before it was like, can you believe that Black Friday starts like Thanksgiving night? Now it's like, oh yeah, November 1st, Black Friday is off and running with these early deals. So a lot of people say in the comments, a lot of the magic for Black Friday has been removed because it's so diluted now. It's so spread out. Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's not the camp out to 3 a.m. to make sure you get the best deals anymore. It's like, okay, let me jump between 8 different websites and I'll shop around and find the best deal even at the end of October. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Lucy, who says they already have a category for DLC. It's called Best Ongoing Game, awarded to a game for outstanding development of ongoing content that evolves the player experience over time, which I did check last year's Best Ongoing Game. You could see the category. It has Cyberpunk 2077, Apex Legends, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, and Genshin Impact, which seems like this is just a category that is always going to have basically the same games here every year, it feels like. And in this case, Cyberpunk did win, and that was for Phantom Liberty. So this year, this category would have made sense to have maybe even these same games and then Shadow the Erdtree there. And most likely Shadow the Erdtree would win. So it's odd to me that there is a category that's already set up to accept this DLC situation and move it away from Game of the Year. Because, hey, when you go into a digital storefront, try this. Click Games. See if Shadow the Erdtree appears, because most likely you need to also click DLC to get it to show up, next to the base game that it actually has to have to play. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. Helps out a ton and hopefully heals my voice faster. If not, though, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to see a bit more about the internals of the PS5 Pro and find out exactly what Sony didn't tell you about their new system. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.